Hello everybody, welcome to the stream. We are continuing our Byzantium playthrough. Last time we pretty much pulled all of Anatolia together, which is way better than the historical Komnenian dynasty did, although we had the considerable help of the complete and utter implosion of the Sultanate of Rum. So now all we have to do is mop up some of the last Muslim resistance in Anatolia, and we ought to be okay to continue our glorious restoration of Rome. That said, we will greatly need to build up our armies if we want to have any chance of that, and for that I need to, well, invest in my domain, which is some of the richest lands historically in Byzantium, were the lands along the Sea of Marmara. That's exactly what I'm going to be beefing up tonight. And I am pretty excited. This is a fun mod. I have my gripes, but it's overall a pretty fun mod. So we're going to start by getting this vassalage situation fixed, so that none of our existing vassals come to hate us. There we go. We should have some pretty sexy internal borders now. There we go. So yeah, we just gotta wait for these truces to be up, and we can start really going after the remaining Muslim kingdoms here. So in the meantime, I am going to be upgrading all of my holdings here. They really did do Constantinople itself dirty, though. It is so nerfed from what it ought to be. Constantinople was the Byzantine Empire in this period. Howdy, welcome to the stream. So yeah, with Constantinople really, I cannot stress to you enough the importance of that city. Without Constantinople, the Roman Empire would not have lasted as long as it did, i.e. until 1453, because Constantinople was really the last outpost of the Roman Empire to fall. It is, simply put, probably the single most strategically important city in all of the old world. Because here's the thing, it is the gateway between Europe and Asia. Otherwise, you have to march your ass all the way through Siberia, which sucks. Or you have to march all the way across northern Africa and try the Straits of Gibraltar. So if you're an invading army looking to get into Europe, or a merchant for that matter, the safest, easiest route took you through Constantinople. And the Bosporus Straits control all sea traffic going from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. So, without Constantinople, you probably don't see the Roman Empire survive past 476, at least not for very long. But because of the sheer power of this one city, even after 2/3 of the empire got amputated during the initial Muslim invasions, the empire survived. And then indeed thrived a few times after that. That's a cool little mod that gives me some updates when people I'm watching go to war. Okay, yeah, I know we're being raided. I don't want to deal with that right now. Alright, when's my truce with this asshole up? This is the problem. I'm down to, like, only a handful of people I can actually attack. Okay, why can I not fight you? What? There we go. Alright, I can go to war with him and expand that way. Yeah, my army should be significantly my main gripe with this mod is that the King of France and the King of England can raise larger armies than me, um, and that would not have been the case in this day and age. I mean, even up after the Canadian Restoration, which is basically what I've accomplished here, um, the Byzantine Empire would have been able to muster a enormous army. Howdy, welcome to the stream. One thing they do seem to have gotten very right. You see how slow my army's moving? This is the thing that really saved Byzantium prior to their loss at Manzikert. Anatolia is one of the most geographically difficult regions to invade because it's all mountains until you get up to the coastal plain here near modern-day Istanbul. That's why largely the eastern reaches of Turkey are relatively undeveloped compared to the area around the Sea of Marmara. But actually invading this territory has always been a logistical nightmare. So the only time the Turks were ever able to do it was after they completely obliterated the Byzantine army in one go. So they faced almost no resistance after Manzikert, which allowed them to conquer pretty much all of Anatolia in one fell swoop. And that's really what did the Byzantines in. Alright, that was fast. Okay. Now, we also have the Armenians here to deal with. Now, modern-day Armenia is right around here, roughly, although it did used to be much larger. The Armenians had a historical range of much larger. Though, due to the Armenian genocide during World War I, they've shrunk back down to the part that was under the control of the Russian Empire at the time. But during the High Medieval era, a bunch of Armenians migrated from their homeland down to this region here, around Cilicia and Antioch. And they actually had a significant role during the Crusades. As a friendly Christian group, the Crusaders could rely on for allies or resupply. The other thing is the election system in Byzantium in this mod is a little wonky. What do I do? Do I want to keep him as an ally? Yeah, I'll break my alliance. I don't care about him all that much. I mean, it's not like he's the Kaiser or anything. Actually, let me see if I can get an alliance with France. My younger son. Okay, he won't accept. Okay. Unfortunately, he is not cranking out kids. I mean, it makes sense. He's gay. That does impact fertility. But I want him, and he's malnourished, so I want him to crank out kids so I don't have to worry about it. Although, I don't have to worry too much because I have that elective succession, so I can run... Oh, yeah. The papacy is looking pretty damn thick. He's really taken advantage of the fact that the HRE is imploding a lot sooner than it probably should. Like, HRE didn't really implode until the 30 Years' War. And even then it lingered on into the early 19th century. But yeah, this would have been the heyday of the HRE, so it shouldn't be imploding like this. Alright. Need that truce to be over. What is the name of the war? Huh. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here exactly. Okay, it's just a pretty normal little civil war. That in itself was not that uncommon for the HRE. Um, Sometimes emperors would get excommunicated, and that was just open season on their titles. Just slowly building up. How far are we from... Oh, well, we haven't been researching it, that's why. There we go. In 11 years, I ought to be able... Unless, actually, I get something with this. I can have him help with that. So we can get battlements, which is what we really, really need. So we can start upgrading these castles here. Now, I think Constantinople... Constantinople is just Constantinople. It is what it is. But the rest of these can be upgraded, and we're going to want to. How about you? Can I kill you? See, that's what I don't like. Oh, he's allied with the King of Georgia, and I'm allied with the King of Georgia. Imagine that. Alright, so once he or the King of Georgia dies, I ought to be able to absorb him. Alright. Chancellor. I also don't like that I have little to no control over who is in my court. The Emperor would have had pretty much express complete control over who was on his court, at least in terms of who was actually doing stuff for him. Don't really need a physician right this second. Though we do get some really cool decisions with this mod. I mean, theoretically, if the Byzantines had been able to have another big resurgence, like a Justinian style, they might have been able to actually mend the schism. The main issue was the Pope was a separate patriarch, basically, from what the Byzantines were used to. Because actually, both the Pope and the... I'll sacrifice some piety for some money. Both the Pope... I did once. That was a pretty wild game. That was one of the ones where I actually managed to get the immortality trait organically. That was a fun time. But historically, the Pope and the Patriarch of Constantinople were leftovers, basically, from a larger system further back in the late Roman Empire called the Pentarchy, which had basically a high bishop in Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. It's true, but it was the once in a blue moon where it actually worked for me. I think it was just a total stroke of luck. But after the initial Muslim invasions, there were no longer a pentarch of Antioch, Jerusalem, or Alexandria. At least under a unified Roman system. The Patriarch of Alexandria still exists, and he's the head of the Coptic Church, but he is not at all connected to the old pentarchal system. I'll actually be talking about the Pentarchy in episode 7 of the podcast, which should be coming sometime in August. I've been pretty busy lately, so I haven't had a whole lot of time to work on it. But things should calm down pretty soon. and I ought to really be able to get my nose back on the grind. It is a lot harder than I thought when I started this, like, balancing it all. Because I want to deliver the best content that I can, but I've also got, like, a life to maintain, so that takes priority. But I'm always working on the podcast, whenever I get the time. Alright, this truce has to be almost up. Holy crap, how long is this truce? See, it doesn't get... It used to tell you how many years you had left on your truce with people. It's fine, I'll just keep beefing up my army. Could use more Varangians. See, once I get the money together, I will add in some of those. It's also good that I increase my county control in my main territory here. Let's see if we can get a decent alliance here. Alright, we'll get Hungary in that one. Nice. See if you can get me an alliance, daughter. Oh, she can actually marry the King of Croatia. That'll work. Nice. Alright, got full control over Chalcedon. What next? I'll take Nicomedia next. And I have a new trait. How old am I? I'm holding up pretty well, I think. Yeah, I'm 54. Probably gonna pass on soon, I would think. Howdy, welcome back. You said you had some historical questions? Yeah, I got my bachelor's from Towson University with a focus on East Asian history, but I've since pivoted to more into the medieval era. So I was actually trained as a historian. I will tell you the same thing that my favorite professor told me, because I basically asked her that same question. Senior year of college, I was genuinely considering pursuing a PhD in history. I had the grades for it. I graduated with honors, 3.7 GPA. I was pretty damn good at what I did. So I went to Dr. Gadati and I asked her honestly, like, would you urge me to pursue a PhD? And she said, I can't in good conscience tell you to do that, because she thought the rate at which, now this is true for America, that the rate at which American universities were churning out history PhDs was downright irresponsible. Now, I don't know what your situation is in Argentina. I don't know what, like, the academic situation is down there. But I can tell you that in the States, especially if you're studying, like, American history, it can be hard to find work because there are a hell of a lot of Americanists because you don't need to learn a foreign language. Most history PhDs need to learn a handful of foreign languages, both living and dead. So, okay, well, then you will probably have a better chance than most. But it really depends on what you want to study. So, Dr. Gadati was a Middle East and ancient Egypt expert. And she told me that the only place that there really was work that she was aware of was in the study of the Demotic script and Roman Egypt, which isn't really what I was interested in. So what I would do is talk to a professor you trust down in Argentina and see if they know of any jobs. They would be your best leads because they would probably know what their colleagues were working on. And I will also tell you that I would imagine the standards are pretty similar between Argentina and the U.S., but depending on what you want to study, you will have to learn a handful of foreign languages. So, for example, if I had wanted to, yeah, so it would have been like research on late Roman Egypt and the Demotic script. Mostly deciphering Demotic because it's the least glamorous of the Egyptian scripts to study, so there aren't a whole lot of people interested in doing it. For what I wanted to do, East Asian history at the time, I would have had to have learned probably ancient and modern Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. I spoke a little bit of Mandarin at the time, but that is a difficult language to learn. I'll also tell you the same thing that my parents told me before I went off to college, which is as long as you have a plan and you're determined enough, you can probably find work doing just about anything. Um, Look out for museum jobs. I actually live not too far from the Smithsonian Institute, and even then, there aren't many jobs open. But again, that's just the United States. If you talked to an Argentine professor, they would probably be able to give you a bit more detail on what the situation there actually is. Because I can only speak to you as an American who was interested in pursuing a history PhD in this country. So I would imagine it falls under like what most academic careers are, where you got to know somebody to sort of point you in the right direction a lot of times. Sure thing, sure thing. I mean, when I went to college, my plan was actually to become a lawyer. Um, I found out I was not cut out to be a lawyer pretty quick into law school, so I only wasted one semester there. But if there had been jobs open, I probably would have pursued a PhD. So if the opportunity presents itself, go for it. It's just a case of in the United States, um, there ain't a whole lot of jobs for historians unless you wanted to be a high school teacher, which wasn't really what I was into. I would have wanted to go on the college level. Yeah, no, I don't mind telling you. I'm basically a financial researcher. Um, a lot of the skills transfer over. So once you learn how to do, like, once you learn effective research, which you can learn through a lot of disciplines in college, you can pretty much apply that skill set to anything. And that's basically what I do. So I'll write stock reports, I'll write about the economy, things like that. It's interesting. I get to learn new shit every day, so I do enjoy it. But the dream is to make the podcast my full-time job, honestly. Well, they won before I could even get there. Yeah, but I would absolutely love it if this podcast was my day job. But I've got a pretty long way to go before I can do that. I mean, I'm still at the point where if I get 100 views on one of my videos, that is an exceptionally fantastic day for me. And actually, this platform is the one I've seen the fastest growth on. I have more followers on Twitch than I do um, YouTube or pretty much anything else, honestly. Okay, so that's all level 2. Wait, I should. And I mean, I have been tempted. Like, I've gone and looked about getting a history degree, but it would be a lot of work with potentially nothing. That depended on where you were and what sort of civilization you were in. So, in medieval Europe, the divine right of kings was a somewhat later development. Um, but by like the High Middle Ages, most kings were crowned by the Pope. Um, so that was seen as sort of God mandating their rule. So typically, a monarch would have to do something pretty fucked up to get like a popular revolt against them. Or he would have had to get excommunicated, which was a pretty surefire way to lose um, a lot of support you have with your own subjects. Because the idea was the temporal courts on the court of the king or queen on this earth was supposed to mimic the one in heaven, i.e., as there was one God in heaven, there should be just one monarch on earth. And that's an idea that goes back to the Roman Empire. Is Croatia... Oh, yes, they are. What's going on? Oh, there's a kid in charge, so someone is trying to claim his throne. What was I on about? Divine right of kings. So, the idea of a divine... Right, so not particularly. So the divine right of kings only really applied to monarchies. Venice and Genoa and the other sort of Italian merchant republics they functioned as very, very small scale republics that pretty much played nice with everybody. Mostly because they weren't about to lose money over something like that, over something as stupid as ideology. So what they were single cities, not large self-governing regions. So the monarchies didn't feel particularly threatened by them, nor did the republics feel all that threatened by monarchies. You only really start seeing sort of republics threatening monarchies during the Age of Enlightenment, which is when you get the idea of sort of democratic republics. Because the other thing you got to know about republics like Venice and Pisa and Genoa is they weren't particularly democratic. It was largely an oligarchic republic made up of powerful merchant families in the city. So they got to vote, but your average day laborer or blacksmith or whatever, he didn't have a vote. So it was a similar kind of hereditary rule system. One of the few republics that did actually piss off the nobility of Europe was when the Duchy of Milan, for a brief time, became the Ambrosian Republic. He's not calling me in, and that's not who she's married to. Okay, he's back in charge then. So that's good for me. He won. Or is winning, at least. Probably a counter civil war. I don't even know what's happening, but there's not a whole lot I can do about the situation unless he calls me into it, I think. So the Ambrosian Republic did actually threaten the old school forms of government because the leader of that republic was elected by popular vote. It wasn't like the merchant republics of Venice, Pisa, and Genoa. Basically, there was very little ideologically behind the Venetian Republic. It was their motivation was money, not ideology. So they weren't going to go fucking around with monarchs because that's where most of their money came from. Yeah, Venice was one of the more cynical medieval states. They rarely had motivation beyond making money. See the Fourth Crusade as an example. Venice care less about Christian control of the Holy Land. They just wanted they wanted to sort of flex on the Byzantines, who were their main. So I am by no means an expert on the Republic of Venice, but there were several councils that ruled the city, and they all elected a doge, which yeah, the meme and everything, but no, the doge, or I think it's pronounced doge, was this the leader of the republic, and they were elected in terms. I think it might have been a lifelong term. I cannot think of. I'm not an expert on Venice, but basically there was a leader of the city chosen called Doge, and under him there were several councils. I believe there was a council of 10, a council of 100, that made decisions for the city. The main thing about those early republics, so republics are around for a long time. They originate with Rome, but republics on a grand scale kind of fall out of favor after Rome. Because the Eastern Roman Empire really just paid lip service to the idea of the old republic and the Senate, because the Senate had no real power in the Eastern Roman Empire, especially after the fall of the West. And the Senate had been a long time declining in power. But republics on a citywide scale, those have been pretty common throughout history. See Venice, Florence, Genoa, believe Capua was one. Naples, I know, was one. Yeah, so the Senate kind of hung on as a vestigial body in the Roman Empire. It gradually lost power after the reign of Augustus. And it kind of just became a shadow of its former self over time. And the Eastern Roman Empire, yeah, basically. Like, the Senate was mostly just a bunch of bickering nobles that had very little influence over how the empire was actually run. And this becomes more and more true the later you get in imperial history. So Augustus had to deal with a Senate that was still relatively powerful. But by the time you get to Septimus Severus, it's the Senate. It doesn't have any real power anymore, because to most people, the emperor is Rome. Now, the old Republicans of Rome would have viewed that as the complete failure of everything they held dear. But it was just kind of the natural progression of things. A republic, Republics make ruling a very large territory difficult, at least with the sort of republic they had at the time. Now, modern republics benefit from a lot of modern ideas from the Enlightenment that just didn't exist for the Romans, so the republic kind of fell apart as Rome grew more and more powerful. It was still relatively easy to run the republic when, for example, all they controlled was southern Italy. But once they controlled Gaul and most of the eastern Mediterranean, the Senate became less and less important because most of the people in the provinces had no connection to Rome whatsoever. And you find this with the Balkan emperors, especially later. They consider themselves fully Roman, but they have no connection to Rome itself. Like, Diocletian only visited Rome a handful of times in his life. But he considered himself a Roman, full bore. It's just he had no connection to the old republic or the city itself. He had a connection to the empire, which at that point was the more well-known institution that had grown from Rome. So to people in the outer provinces, the emperor was Rome, not the Senate, not the republic, because most of those people had never even heard of the Roman Republic, except for maybe in passing. But the reality for them was the emperor is in charge, the emperor is Rome, the emperor is the one who brought us roads, who brought us protection, who brought us economic prosperity. So for them, the empire was Rome, not the republic. And that is what persists in the East, because the Eastern Roman Empire was completely disconnected from the old Republican tradition. They didn't speak Latin. They spoke Greek. They were honestly more connected to the ancient Greeks than they were the Romans, simply in terms of culture. I mean, this was the stomping grounds of like Plato and Aristotle and all those vaunted Greeks of the past. So the East, and the other thing you got to consider is the East was right next to Persia, which was the sort of blueprint of the autocratic empire. So they did borrow a little bit from that. And Christianity also led to the decline of republicanism, or what was left of it, because heaven isn't a republic. Heaven is a monarchy, if you listen to Christian doctrine. God is the king, and he's not voted for. So the idea was that on earth, temporal authority should imitate divine authority. So over time, the Senate just becomes this old vestige that nobody really gives a shit anymore, because they have no power whatsoever. And I can finally go to war with this asshole. Yes, like the Senate would often voice its displeasure at the actions of the emperor, to which the emperor promptly said, "I don't fucking care, I'm the emperor." I mean, there were certainly emperors who thought that. And then particularly when you get into the Eastern emperors, they were very different. They were a direct line from Augustus, but they were very different from Augustus. Emperors like Justinian or Nicephorus Phocas or Basil II, for all intents and purposes, they were the Roman Empire. They were the physical manifestation of Rome in a lot of ways. And I'm, I'm reminded of the "What have the Romans ever done for us?" bit from Life of Brian, which is a classic movie. All right, there we go. Right. Besides for wine, roads, the aqueducts, public order, what have the Romans ever done for us? Alright, so because my one son is the Symbacilius, we're going to give my other son this duchy here, Apiscion. Right, I can't actually do that because it automatically assigns them. So I think I should be able to give these themes to whoever the hell I feel like. The Strategoi were appointed by the Emperor, so that I can't appoint Strategoi myself is kind of bullshit. Life of Brian, it's tough. I love both Life of Brian and The Meaning of Life. Those are honestly my two favorites. Like, of course I like Holy Grail. Everyone likes Holy Grail. But I think of the Monty Python movies that make me crack up laughing every goddamn time I watch them. It's Life of Brian and The Meaning of Life. I'm making friends all over the damn place. That said, when Julius Caesar declared himself dictator for life, he basically pulled the old "I am the Senate" line a few centuries too early. Because the thing is, the dictator was an actual position in the Roman Republic, and this is something I always thought was fascinating about them. The Byzantines were pretty damn active, all things considered. They didn't much like the Holy Roman Empire, but they would interact with them when they had to. And the whole reason they came to control the Balkans is they converted a lot of the South Slavs to Orthodox Christianity as a form of soft power. Same thing with the Russians. The Orthodox Church was kind of a good way for the Byzantines to extend diplomacy north. When they could, they would interfere with Crusader armies, but they didn't always have the opportunity. They also interacted heavily with Georgia, and believe it or not, they also interacted quite often with Muslim rulers. Their relationship wasn't always antagonistic. Sometimes Muslim rulers, out of fear or self-interest, allied themselves with the Byzantines because they were a serious power in the region. It would be sort of like, I mean, if two of the U.S.'s enemies with so if say you have two small countries that are enemies with one another, one of them might swallow its pride and ally themselves with a powerhouse like the U.S. simply to fuck over the enemy they hate more that's right next door to them. You find a similar case with the Crusader states. Oftentimes, the local Arabs would side with the Crusaders against the Turks because a lot of the Arabs hated the Turks more than they hated the Christians. Let's see. Sum of all skills. I hope he's produced children at this point. So yeah, the Byzantines were pretty far from isolationist. Like, yeah, they still looked at themselves as the rightful rulers of all the world, but they were also pretty realistic. They were under no illusion that their empire was what it used to be. So honestly, I would describe Byzantine diplomacy as realpolitik. They were very opportunistic and smart. They typically didn't they were motivated largely by convenience, what worked for them at the time. They weren't bound. Well, they were Romans, so they were adaptable. Roman culture was always remarkably adaptable to its situation. It wouldn't cling to ideas that didn't work anymore. That's something I always admired about the Romans. If something they were doing wasn't working anymore, they'd stop doing it. Or at least modify the idea to make it more effective to their current situation. Let's see if we can crank out another kid. Because I don't think my son is going to be producing any children. Just doesn't seem to want to. And actually, you see the Byzantines are very involved in foreign diplomacy before they lose Anatolia. So, I am of a school of historians that think geography is one of the single most important things to the history of nations. If your geography isn't good, you're basically fucked in the long term. Or unless you can manage the problems of your geography. So, Byzantium is doing great. Exactly, you've got it. Byzantium is doing great, even after they lose both the Levant and Egypt, because they have control of Anatolia. Now, I think I have a terrain map. Look at that. That's all mountains. Anatolia is one of the most difficult places in the world to invade. You've only got a narrow band around the coast where you can actually move armies effectively. This basically forces any invading force into one of two routes, unless they have the men for both, which very few forces in this period did. What's more, if you tried to traverse central Anatolia, often you would lose a lot of men just to attrition, because it's hot, water is fairly scarce, and the locals are pretty unfriendly to most invaders. The Crusaders learned this, the Arabs learned this, most people who have tried to invade across Anatolia have learned this. So Anatolia is one of the most defensive geographical positions on the planet, and that sheltered Constantinople, along with mountains. So they weren't very viable until the Byzantines kind of lost a lot of their power base. So for most of medieval history, the Byzantine navy is the single most powerful in the Western Hemisphere, hands down. It's the largest and the most advanced. And I mean, you have Byzantine ships with flamethrowers in the 10th century. Most of you have probably heard of Greek fire, which we actually still don't have the recipe for. We have no idea how it was made. But we do know it was really fucking effective. Because think of it as ancient napalm. That's basically how it functioned. It was something similar to like jellied petroleum that stuck to men and buildings and boats and burned. Like, it could burn the water. Although, fun fact, it was actually a Syrian who invented it. It was just the Byzantine Empire who used it, so it was most associated with the Greeks. But it was actually a Syrian who had fled the Muslim invasions to Constantinople who initially developed the recipe for Greek fire. And the Byzantines had that recipe all the way up until 1453, when it was destroyed in the Turkish conquest of Constantinople. So they knew how to make it right up until the end. It's believed by some historians that they imported petroleum from Azerbaijan and used that to manufacture Greek fire. But in addition to filling clay pots with it and using it as like an artillery weapon, basically fire bombs, they mounted giant siphons to the front of... Yeah, literally, it was crude oil that was coming out of the ground in Azerbaijan. Um, and that's the theory, is that that's what was used as a base for Greek fire. Now, they did some stuff to it. Yeah, we actually are not all that familiar. Like, we actually have lost the recipe for Roman concrete. We don't quite know how they made it so damn strong. And Damascus steel remains a mystery too. Because the more we learn about Damascus steel, the more we want to know how they made it, because it defies all logic and to how it functions. It shouldn't be as strong as it is, but it is. And then Greek fire it functioned like napalm based on historical accounts of it. There are accounts of like Arab soldiers getting burned by Greek fire that once it was on you, you couldn't put it out. It was a chemical fire. Oh, we have plenty of it. We have plenty of surviving Damascus steel. We just can't reverse engineer it. It's crazy. Like, we have the stuff, we just cannot figure out how they made it. Because some of this Damascus steel actually has carbon nanotubes in it. And that's technology we're only just beginning to understand, that was figured out by 9th and 10th century Arabs. That we still have no fucking clue how they actually made this stuff. And it's like Greek fire. Like, we only really figured out how to make something similar in Vietnam, like centuries after the fact. Because napalm is the closest modern thing to what Greek fire was. So it took us centuries after the fall of Constantinople to figure out how to make something similar. Maybe not, although I don't think it was aliens. I think it was just the recipe might have been lost. And it's like Roman concrete. Like, we have concrete today, but I defy you to find a modern concrete building that will last as long as the Colosseum has. The Colosseum has survived earthquakes, and all the concrete that was used in it was mixed up more than 2,000 years ago. Yeah, we know who invented Greek fire. I'm blanking on his name. But yeah, he was a Syrian alchemist who fled the Muslim invasions. He was an Orthodox Christian who, after the Muslims took control of Syria, he fled north to Constantinople and got a job in the court of the emperor, who was also a Syrian, Leo III, if I remember correctly. And yeah, and he developed this insane chemical weapon, basically, that nobody had any counter to, because again, it was basically flamethrowers in the 10th and 11th centuries, which is fucking crazy. And the Byzantines would use it as an artillery weapon, as a naval weapon. It was insane. And I mean, we only figured out how to make something similar to that in the last century. And Damascus steel, we still haven't figured that out. Thank God he finally cranked out a kid. He's below average height, but at least he will continue the dynasty. Okay, who are we dealing with? Okay, it's a holy war for Georgia. I mean, look at how quickly someone like Robert Oppenheimer was able to... Well, there were plenty of other scientists who participated in the Manhattan Project, but Robert Oppenheimer was the real brainchild behind the operation, or the real brains behind the operation. Not off the top of my head, but there are ancient structures that boggle the mind. I mean, the pyramids, for example. Like, we know the Egyptians built the pyramids. I don't buy the aliens theory for a second. But they become even more impressive when you realize that the people building the pyramids, the Egyptian engineers, all they had access to was pencil and paper and very basic math. Because remember, algebra didn't exist yet. Neither did geometry, and they still figured it out. Those were much later innovations. So they had fairly basic math, pencil, paper, and a lot of muscle, and that's how they built the pyramids. Well, that's also true. One of my favorites, the Great Wall of China. When it was nearing, when the first phase of it was nearing completion during the reign of Qin Shi Huangdi, I won't, but it'll keep the Muslims from gaining control of Georgia, who is a valuable ally to have in the region. But so early on in the construction of the Great Wall of China, Qin Shi Huangdi was told by a seer that 10,000 men would die in the construction of it. He was fine with that because Qin Shi Huangdi was a brutal psychopath. But when they were nearing completion of the project, he realized that they were a little bit short of that number, or a lot a bit short of that number. So he found a man in China whose name meant 10,000, basically, because if you look at Chinese names, the characters that make them up have their own meanings. So this guy's name meant 10,000. So he had him buried alive beneath the Great Wall to avoid any bad luck on his mega project. Granted, Qin Shi Huangdi also drank mercury like a fucking nut, and he was widely regarded as just a brutal fucking lunatic. Effective military leader, but a total goddamn psycho. My thoughts exactly when I learned about that one. The dude was fucking nuts. It's no wonder why the Han Dynasty overthrew him in a popular revolt. People will only put up with that shit for so long. It is. Yeah, exactly. But that was actually my specialty in college. I focused on Chinese history. In particular, communist China, but I did study dynastic China quite extensively. Actually, I wrote, so at the university I did my degree at, we had to write two big papers. One of them in junior year, one of them in senior year, and shit, we've got a civil war. Alright, gotta deal with this. Thank God I can fire these assholes. Alright, fire him. So yeah, in my college we had to do two big papers. We had to do one in junior year, one in senior year. The one in junior year was a weed out class for history majors. The one in senior year, you had to do that to graduate. So the first paper was a military analysis of the Korean War with special focus on the Chinese role in it. The second paper was a political analysis of the Sino-Soviet relationship during the Korean War. In particular, the personal politics at play between Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin, which were fascinating. Because here you have these brutal fucking dictators. Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin were two of the most evil men who ever lived, but they act like children to one another. So Mao has it in his head a lot of these old Chinese ideas that so Charlemagne's empire broke apart largely due to the way succession worked in Germanic kingdoms. So Charlemagne's only legitimate son, Louis the Pious, well, he had other legitimate sons, but they were disinherited when they tried to revolt against him. But Louis the Pious was the only... Okay, I will get back to China in a moment, but Louis the Pious was the only legitimate son of Charlemagne, and he split the empire between his three sons. And that's how the empire split apart, because it was seen as tradition in Germanic societies to split evenly between all your sons. And yeah, it was pretty stupid, honestly. But going back to China for a moment, Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin. Mao had it in his head a lot of these ideas from old Chinese history. that China's name for itself is the Middle Kingdom, Zhongguo. Um, I think I might still be able to pronounce that correctly from the 3 years of Chinese I took in college. So Zhongguo means Middle Kingdom, and it speaks to how the Chinese perceive themselves. They are the center of the world. Mao still believed this, and a lot of his conflict with Stalin is Stalin viewed himself rightly as the more powerful of the two. The Soviet Union in the early 1950s was objectively more powerful than Communist China. They might have had a smaller army, but it was better equipped. They had nukes. They were, by every measure, a more powerful country. But Mao refused to accept that, and he demanded basically that Stalin pay tribute to him in the form of military equipment. Now, he did this by complaining when equipment wasn't given, but also not asking for it because he didn't think he should have had to ask for it. Mao believed that Stalin should have just given him anything he wanted without him having to ask for it. And Stalin was like, fuck you. Because Stalin was not one to be fucked with either. So there's a lot of this like very immature, like, you haven't given me all the like anti-tank guns I wanted. And Stalin is like, yeah, you didn't ask for them, asshole. Here they are, whatever. Stalin didn't give a shit. He just wanted to fuck with the Americans, which is what the Chinese were to him. Just a tool that he could use to fuck with the Americans. Because really, the Chinese using human wave tactics in... Here's the thing you gotta know about the People's Liberation Army. It treated its own people so horribly that most of the Chinese POWs taken by American GIs didn't want to go back to China. They wanted to go back to the States and serve time in a military prison before going back to China. And in writing that paper, I listened to interviews with both American veterans of the war and Chinese veterans of the war. And the American veterans of the war were very disturbed by what they saw because they perceived what the Chinese were doing as just throwing their lives away. They couldn't comprehend why thousands and thousands of people would run into American machine gun fire without so much as a rifle. They were like, they're throwing their lives away. What is going on here? Meanwhile, most of the Chinese didn't know what the hell they were doing there. There's this veteran I saw an interview of. It was a Chinese veteran of the Korean War, and he was all scarred up. His left arm had scars running the length of it onto his neck. He looked like he had been through a meat grinder. It was horrible. But he was basically saying, to this day, I have no fucking clue what we were doing there. And this is more than 50 years after the fact. Now, most of the American GIs at least had some vague idea of what they were doing in Korea. They were protecting the South Koreans who, at the time, had been pushed all the way back to Busan, which is a small town in the south... Sorry, my orientation's all messed up. In the southeast of Korea. When the Americans arrived, we pushed them all the way back to the Yalu River. Now, this is where I have a huge bone to pick with General MacArthur. General Douglas MacArthur wanted to press into China and topple the communist government. Well, coming off of World War II, Congress was not too eager to get involved in another massive land war, particularly one that the Japanese had failed miserably at just a few years before. I mean, we saw how much the Japanese had struggled to subdue mainland China, and we didn't want any part of that. Well, MacArthur did. And MacArthur refused to do what Congress wanted him to do, which was to basically fortify the Yalu, so that when the Chinese came, they would basically hit a fortified line. Well, MacArthur refused to do that. He refused to fortify the Yalu, so when the Chinese came and hit American forces, they were only able to fall back because they had no fortifications to resist the sheer number of men China threw at us. Eventually, they were pushed all the way back to the 39th parallel, which is where the modern DMZ is. That's just where the Americans finally managed to stop the Chinese advance. And all of this happened in like the first year of American involvement. From 1951 to 1953, all we did was basically shoot at each other angrily across the Korean DMZ. Actually, that is the other thing. MacArthur wanted to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Manchuria to basically create an irradiated wasteland the Chinese wouldn't be able to move through. Which, in purely military strategy, yeah, that would have worked if you completely ignore ethics or anything that would have not caused World War III. Because I guarantee you, had the U.S. deployed nuclear weapons right in Manchuria, which is basically Russia's backyard at the time, the Soviets would not have hesitated to drop nukes on American territories. Now, to MacArthur's credit, he ran an excellent campaign in the Pacific during World War II. The island-hopping campaign was sheer brilliance. But he was crazy. Yeah, basically, because... So here's the other thing that nobody really understands about nuclear weapons. Is that nukes are not like... It's not like Fallout, where the wasteland is still irradiated 200 years later. That's true of, like, nuclear fuel. Because the nuclear fuel you get in reactors, like Chernobyl... That is a far more stable isotope of uranium that doesn't degrade as quickly. Now, to get nuclear weapons, to get that explosion, you need U-235 or plutonium, both of which are extremely unstable isotopes. So they create a very explosive reaction, but then they actually degrade much faster. That's why both Hiroshima and Nagasaki are livable today. People live in both cities because the radiation dissipates fairly quickly. But it would still have been a few years before the Chinese would actually have been able to move men through there without them getting irradiated all to hell. Also, that is partially true in that they develop... I'm no expert on nuclear science now, so... Don't take what I'm saying as gospel, but modern-day nukes will eradicate a city completely. There were survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If a modern American or Russian nuke got dropped on a big city, there wouldn't be survivors. Especially if it's like a hydrogen warhead or a thermonuclear bomb. And actually, fun fact about the thermonuclear bomb, Robert Oppenheimer thought that was completely unethical. He thought it was too much. Now, this is the guy who developed the atomic bomb, the initial bombs, the little man and fat boy, the little boy and fat man bombs. Oppenheimer thought that developing the hydrogen bomb and the thermonuclear bomb were a step too far. Also, if you've ever wanted to feel academically inadequate, Oppenheimer finished college at age 22. Or no, he finished his PhD at age 22. He went to Harvard when he was a teenager. And that was back when Harvard was good. The man was giving lectures at age 12. That is interesting, and I will look into it. But the main thing you gotta know about nuclear weapons is because the material used to make them is much less stable than what you got in, like, nuclear fuel that you would find in a modern reactor. It dissipates much more quickly. The reason that... the reason that Chernobyl is still radioactive is that it was stable uranium that was meant to be used as fuel for the reactor. So that is still radioactive because it's still breaking down, and it will be radioactive for decades or even centuries. Same story with Fukushima Daiichi in Japan. That region will likely be irradiated for a long time because it was nuclear fuel, stable nuclear isotopes. They don't explode, but when they melt down, they create a lot of radioactive material that sticks around for a very long time. I mean, it wasn't like he volunteered for it. He was selected to by the New York Mineralogical Society, and then he graduated with a degree in chemistry at like age 18, which is when a lot of Americans start college, and then he finished his PhD at like 22, 23. Why do you hate me so much? You're fired. Get the fuck out of here. You're fired. I can't fire. Yes, I can. There we go. Wait, maybe I can't. I can fire you. Can fire you. Yeah, you're losing everything, assholes. Fucking go figure when you stand against your emperor. But Oppenheimer was one of those geniuses that just doesn't come around all that long. He was a very complicated figure given what he did in developing the atomic bomb. But honestly, I think he felt the full weight of what he did, as evidenced by some of his quotes after the gadget was tested in at Trinity. I mean, now I am become death, destroyer of worlds. He knew full well what he had done. He knew the thing he had created was unlike anything that had ever existed before it. And I still to this day wonder if he ever had any regrets about it. I mean, he's not going to come out and say he did, and he never did, but I wonder if he ever regretted basically being the instrumental creator of a device that could end all life on this planet. It's a complicated legacy to have. That said, if we didn't do it, the Germans would have. Because the Germans were working on they did have a nuclear program. It wasn't anywhere near as well funded or as developed as the Manhattan Project, but it did exist. And they had plenty of brilliant nuclear physicists in Germany as well. Lisa Meitner and Otto Frisch and a handful of others who basically developed the idea of nuclear fission. Until they figured out that fission was possible, we didn't even know that a nuclear bomb was something you could make. Well, you're fired too if you're going to support this asshole. Yeah, I know I'm stressed, but who are you? Who even are you? There we go. Alright, we're about to die. I'll hang on to the money in case we need some mercenaries. I actually did a whole episode on the development of atomic weapons, if anyone's curious. Here it is. It's like a 18-minute long summary of the history of the Manhattan Project, which was the single most, in my opinion, was the single most impressive scientific endeavor prior to the moon landing, honestly. Let's see if I've got one more war in me. There we go. That's the one I wanted. Alright. Let's fuck up the Turks. We will restore the Roman Empire. Why am I... What? Why would you do that? You just walk there. There you go. Alright, I can finally support my army and still make money. Except for the fact that they're running away from me. And I don't know where they're going. But I do often wonder, in the future, what are the things that we know today that people in the future will be mystified with how we did it? The internet's the only thing I can really think of if for some reason that went down. They might wonder how in hell we actually managed to do something like that. But I don't think we really have anything on par with like Greek fire or Roman concrete or Damascus steel, in the sense that it's just such an incredible thing that is lost to history, how we would do it, you know? Can't seem to catch these dicks. But I can ransom some prisoners. So let's do that. Yeah, that would be... Well, none of us will have much of an opinion on anything if we can't get that sorted out. So, hopefully we can. But when you study history for as long as I have, you find it very difficult to be optimistic about things like that. We are a remarkably short-sighted species, and forgetful. To boot, so it's a bad combination. Yeah, we've almost got the empire of Basil II up and running. Just got a little bit more Muslim resistance to deal with in Anatolia, and we ought to be good to really start expanding into the Seljuk Empire, which we're going to have to do to restore our control of the Levant and of Egypt, which is going to be pretty important to this run, I think. Hold on, my chat has stopped working. Give me a second. Oh, that's weird. Hold on just a second. My computer is being weird. There we go, that should do it. And we're back. Sorry about that. We have another faction. Great. Granted, the environment has been fucked for a while, if you look at how things have been going. the Soviets did such a number on Nikolaevsk, which is a mining town in northern Russia, that it's still toxic to this day. A lot of heavy industry and nickel mining went on there during the Soviet Union. That is still causing trouble now. Let's see, need more men. Let's go barracks. Upgrade the trade port. Son of a bitch. This asshole needs to die. Yeah, I know I'm overwhelmed by stress. These assholes keep trying to take my empire. Need to save up some money before that happens, and again, in case we need to hire mercenaries, because we just might need to. As long as that asshole Azakios is alive and trying to steal my throne. Actually, let me have my spy master. Why is he naked? Alright, well, you're gone, you nudist weirdo. Hold on, is he... No, he's an Orthodox Christian. He's not an atomist. So yeah, I'm going to get rid of my naked spy master and replace him with somebody both more competent and wearing clothing. And have them support my schemes. Yes, that is a naked man wearing a wizard hat. This game is nuts sometimes. Granted, CKIII was crazier, so... No, he seemed perfectly... Well, I say perfectly normal. As normal as a naked... Well, actually, here he is. He's angry at me. Oh, he is a lunatic. That's why. He is a lunatic. Well, he's gonna be a jobless naked lunatic soon. And he's naked too. Great. We replaced one naked guy with another naked guy. Can't even get my court to wear pants these days. Gotta love it. I need this Azakios asshole dead now. I don't know who repealed it. I'll keep firing all of you. You know, who thinks, oh, the Emperor's fired everybody who participates in this scheme, but I'm gonna get in on it too, and I hope I don't get fired. Yeah, no shit, asshole, you got fired. You're trying to take my throne. So yeah, I'm gonna... They don't learn, do they? They don't learn. You're getting fired. I just gave you your position and you're rebelling against me, you fucking asshole. Yeah, I know I'm overwhelmed by stress. I'm aware of that. But I'm not about to give up my empire to this dickhead. He's allying himself with naked people. No. And you're fired as well. Get fucked. Right the fuck out of here with that shit. You're gonna ally yourself with nudists? You can get the fuck out of my kingdom. Now, there is a heresy in this game that creates nudists, the atomists. Wait, how do I have so much land? Oh, okay, that's why. Well, now I can give it to my son. That's probably why they're all rebelling against me. Actually, one more go around for the income. Come on, keep going. There we go. That's got it. Now I should be able to usurp Piscion. Or actually create it. Alright, make that a theme. There we go. That's got it. That probably was why they were all pissed with me. Servant of the Horned God. Get the fuck out of here. Don't need you bothering me too. Yes, there we go, I'm dead. Long live Emperor Polycarpos. Holy shit. That's not good. Let's fire all of these people. I'll keep firing all of you. I swear to God, I'll keep firing you. Yeah, I know I'm stressed. There we go. Can send ultimatum in 4 months. Where are you getting this manpower from? You have nothing, and you got like 2 guys with some. Looks like we're going to fight a civil war, which was the norm for Byzantium in this period. They were constantly in civil war. There's a historian on YouTube who described them as a flaming disaster empire, which, yeah, that's about as accurate as it gets. Why do they all hate me? Why do you all hate me? Yes, I know I have a short reign. I just got the position. Oh, Jesus. That's not good. Well, you're fired. And you're fired. Yeah, that's right. And you're fired. And you're fired. Imagine that. This Azakios dick just needs to fucking die. He is an enormous problem. Alright, Alexios. Seems you're my heir. Why do you all hate me? Everybody hates me. I don't know why. Let's go with you. Alright. And we've got another faction. Imagine that. Okay, this is the thing about this mod that makes it irritating. It could also be chalked up to Paradox AI being Paradox AI. Yeah, we'll be grouchy. Let's be grouchy. I have good reason to be Son of a bitch! Jesus. Alright then. I guess we're fighting a civil war. I need an alliance. Alright, King of Georgia. Who else can I get an alliance with? Some Italians? Yeah, let's get them in here. Alright. That should help. Grouchy, we're malnourished. Yeah, let's go with that. Fucking poison his ass. No, fuck you. Why can I not call you to... There we go. Call the war. Who else have I got an alliance with? I know I allied an Italian feller. Let's call you and all 66 of your dudes. They might as well help me. You're the actual powerhouse here. Come on, help me out. Looks like we're gonna go back into debt. Great. Alright, but at least we got our allies in on this shit, so... These dicks shouldn't last all that long. Need to intercept them before they unite with the main body of that army. Alright, kill them then. I'm gonna need... Oh, I've drank a bit too much rum. Switching back to beer. There we go. That's more like it. Once I've sieged this down, I want to do anything in my power to stop them from reuniting with one another. Alright, the Georgians have arrived. And the Italians too, looks like. Alright, there we go. Killed him. That's right. You don't fuck with me. I'll murder your ass. There we go. Alright, Civil War solved. Don't know why they all hate me, but we gotta deal with it. Stress level back under control. Let's ransom these guys. Alright. We are doing okay. Get the fuck out of here. Well, now we've got to murder this guy. Yes, I know that I am in debt. Alright, go to Bithynia. Oh, my son died. Great. Great. Who's my heir now? Alright, my brother. He kind of sucks. So let's hope I pop out another kid. At least all the factions are dealt with, and I am relatively young, and my wife is still able to have kids. So should be okay. Once my men-at-arms are recovered, I should be fine. Why? What exactly do they have issue with here? They should like me. I've got a bunch of good traits. At least now I can make some money and probably boost my popularity once I can slaughter this dickhead some more. Well, I don't have enough devotion. Great. Great. Need more time to prepare, apparently. Right, so before all that mess, what was I talking about? Nuclear weapons, right. Not much. Well, there's plenty to say about those, but off the top of my head, I can't think of a whole lot more. Might also be a bit too many rums in. I will say it did open the door to, well, did I kill him? Damn it. Oh well, he's not dead. But he's a claimant on my throne, so he has to die. Alright. Dutiful. I'm pretty close to faithful, so I can just wait a bit. Build up my money. Build up my army. Get some more Varangians up in here. Second group of Varangians. Yes. There we go. Alright, we've got 5,000 men now. I need a new spy master. But I need somebody who doesn't fucking hate my guts. Any candidates? You don't hate me. Get in here. Okay. Oh, we can... Alright, Dynasty Legacy. Let's keep going with blood. Hopefully we can breed out the below average height over time. Yeah, the religious wars can get annoying because you gotta wait until you have the right level of piety to actually do them. But our borders are starting to look pretty sexy, all things considered. This is basically the extent of Basil II's empire. Basil II is probably one of my favorite Byzantine emperors. Simply for the fact that he was a fucking crazy guy. I am a historian who loves historical lunatics, and Basil II was so crazy he earned himself the nickname of the Bulgar Slayer, which is pretty fucking badass. And the single most badass incident in his whole life was after defeating a group of Bulgar warriors, he sent them home after having his men blind 9 out of every 10 men. And the 10th man was left with one eye to lead the other 9 home. Alright, hopefully we won't die. Yeah, I'm not surprised my computer is starting to chug here, simply because this mod adds so many new counties. So actually, at the moment, I will return to Charlemagne's empire, because I know one of you asked a question about that earlier. So now that I'm done my rant about China. So Charlemagne's empire, it was the first time that Europe had been united, at least most of it, since the fall of the Western Empire. Charlemagne was one of those people who comes along every now and again in history who just has... He's the right man in the right place at the right time, and he's got a magnetic personality. He is a very capable military ruler, or military leader, and he has the right political situation too. So Charlemagne comes to power shortly after his brother, well, he comes to power and then his brother Carloman dies. Carloman leaves him the southern half of the Frankish Empire, and with Francia united, he soon absorbs Italy as well. And then the Pope declares him the Holy Roman Emperor, or at least the Emperor of the Romans, which is where the Holy Roman Empire came from. So Charlemagne's empire passes to his son, Louis the Pious. He also had a son who was a hunchback, who rebelled against him, and ultimately lost, and then was resigned to a monastery for the remainder of his life. So, when Charlemagne dies, his empire passes to Louis the Pious, who was an okay ruler. He was nowhere near what his father was, but he wasn't terrible either. But he has 3 legitimate heirs. So when he dies, he splits his empire into East Francia, West Francia, and Lotharingia in the middle. Now, Lotharingia is not long for this world and soon gets absorbed into East Francia, which is modern-day Germany, basically. So, centuries after the fact, Otto I unites the kingdoms of East Francia, Germany, and, well, East Francia, later Germany, and Italy, and is crowned the Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope. Meanwhile, West Francia becomes modern-day France. Hey, what's up? Welcome to the stream. We're up to some Byzantine fuckery, reconquering Anatolia. Waiting for truces to be up. Which they are, actually. But I don't think I have the piety. I did not, actually. I have been so busy, I have not had a whole lot of time to read the news lately, but I will look it up. Well, good for them. I hope they're successful. Yeah, Cuba has been under the rule of totalitarian dickheads for far too long, and I really do wish the Cuban people luck. I hope I get to see the Cuban communist dictatorship end in my lifetime. That would be awesome. Yeah, I wish them success. Hopefully, Yeah, that would be. I would love it. That would be some of the first good news of 2021 if the Cuban people were finally able to overthrow their dictators and institute an actual republic that isn't run by a bunch of communist bastards. God, Fidel Castro was such a fucking dick. Yeah, I missed that one. Um, my girlfriend, Miss Renegade, and I are actually getting ready to move in. So I have been very busy over the past few weeks, and so is she, especially because she's finishing her thesis for her master's program. So, yeah, thank you. So yeah, we've both been pretty damn busy. So I haven't had as I'm usually a bit of a news junkie, which probably doesn't surprise many of you, but I haven't had a whole lot of time to look at it lately. Probably once we're living together, I will. She's also very into history, but she is very focused in on like World War II and Eleanor Roosevelt in particular. Actually, when we met, she had a on her profile she had a picture of her dressed as Rosie the Riveter with a statue of Eleanor Roosevelt, and that was right about the moment I fell in love with her. Yeah, she's wonderful, and I will. She has expressed interest in doing either a blog post or an episode for a while on Eleanor Roosevelt in particular, who is her favorite historical figure. So hopefully, once we've moved in and once she's done her thesis, she will have the time to do that because I think she'd really enjoy it. She actually is the one who made this T-shirt for me, which is the Renegade Historian T-shirt. I don't know if you can quite see in the pocket here. It's Renegade Historian, and then I've got some stuff on the back that I will show you at some point. But also I do enjoy American history. I had a buddy in college who was an Americanist. Me, myself, I've mostly focused in on East Asia and medieval Europe. But one of the most fascinating classes I took in college was American Military History, 1897 to 1945, with Dr. Robert Rooke, who is a fascinating guy. Oh yeah, now medieval Europe has really captured my academic curiosity for a while now, simply because it's so removed from what we know today. But Dr. Rooke was a fascinating professor I had in college. He spoke fluent Arabic, and he actually lived on an army base in Iraq for a long time, teaching middle school to like the kids of army guys. And now he gives like cultural briefings to Marines on their way over to the Middle East. Interesting guy. And then I learned a lot in that class. Um, American military history really doesn't get a whole lot of light until World War II, which this class covered, but it also covered the development of the modern American military, which really goes back to 1897, and I'll pick a name for my boy here. Thomas, that's a good name. Which really goes back to 1897 and the Spanish-American War, which was the first time that we really... And we're overwhelmed by stress, great. Which is the first time that we really flexed our military muscle with somebody who wasn't Britain, basically. or ourselves, because we. Oh, nice. Yeah, no, that was basically what he did. He spoke Iraqi Arabic, and he wasn't an interpreter, but he did give cultural briefings because he did know the history of the region pretty well. He had one of my favorite summaries of the Marine Corps when he introduced them to us. He was like, "The Marine Corps runs on a form of masculinity that can only be described as nuclear." And I've known a few Marines in my life, and that is entirely true from what I've experienced in the best way possible. Hell, when I was in high school, some of my rugby coaches were drill sergeants in the Army before they became teachers. So we were one of the best conditioned teams in the league. Actually, rugby is a bit more popular in the States than you may think. It's the fastest growing sport in Maryland, which is where I'm from. Ooh, that sounds interesting, but terrifying. Um, yeah, Arabic, Semitic languages. I've learned a little bit about them, um, mostly through my other one of my favorite professors in college, Dr. Gadadi, who was an expert on the ancient Near East. I never could figure out why they didn't write vowels, but no Semitic languages write their vowels. It's the alphabets are almost entirely consonant based. And it goes back to Egyptian, which actually was a problem for us in deciphering it. No, Dr. Rook only really ever gave cultural briefs to Marines on their way over. That was fast. I gotcha. Still, though, it must have been harrowing to be around for things like that. I can't even imagine. Arabic is a really hard language for English speakers to pick up, too. Simply because it's so alien to English. Oh, great, this event line. I hate it. We've got a serial killer in the kingdom. Alright, have I got? I would imagine so. I had a buddy who took a class at Towson with a professor who was ex-IDF, like ex-Israeli Defense Forces. And one student got into an argument with him, and she said that torture doesn't work. And he just looked her dead in the eye and said, "Yes, it does." Which is pretty fucking crazy. Granted, Napoleon wasn't overly fond of torture. Oh, I gotcha. I mean, that is like the MO of a lot of the extremist Islamist groups over there. I know ISIS was freaked out about dying to female soldiers because they thought it would fuck up their chances of getting into heaven, basically. And for that reason, the Kurdish YPG and other groups. Yep, that makes sense. But because of that, groups like oh, I'm dead. Well, that's cool. Let me figure this out, and then I will get right back to you. I'm lucky my brother was my heir. Anyway, yeah, so for that reason, the Kurdish YPJ, or yeah, exactly, that's what I was getting onto. Peshmerga, and then the Kurdish YPJ. I know it's a Kurdish militia, started fielding female units for that reason. Yeah, I am pretty far from an expert on the whole shit show in the Middle East going on right now. Most of my knowledge on the Middle East is very old, or early on during the Islamic conquests. Once you get into like the Seljuk Turks and the sort of late Islamic Middle East, I did not see that, but it sounds interesting. I know that Afghanistan has been a bit of a shit show lately, but I haven't really had the time to go into detail on it. But that is definitely something I will look into. Yeah, I know the Taliban has been resurgent there. Let me check out this article. That's a bunch of women with RPGs. I'd be threatened. Hmm. Hmm. I did hear that the Taliban was resurgent there, which is bad to hear, but I think it's something we're unfortunately always going to have to deal with in the region. I mean, they don't call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires for a reason, or for no reason. Yeah, I wish them luck, but I mean, as far as U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, again, they don't call it the graveyard of empires for nothing. Where did they go? We should never have gotten involved in that place. If Alexander the Great couldn't subdue it, if Genghis Khan couldn't subdue it, what chance do we really have? There's no subduing a place like that. I mean, in large part, it's due to the fact that it's all mountains. And again, it's like what I was talking about earlier. The reason the Byzantines were protected was their geography, because you never want to invade an area that is almost entirely mountains. It will backfire on you every time. Because let me tell you, the people who have been living in those mountains for centuries know them better than you could ever hope to. And it doesn't help when they hate you. Alright. Got to kill these guys. But especially thank you for delivering me the good news on Cuba. That is some of the best, like, world news I've heard in a long time. Because I would very much like to visit Cuba at some point during my life, and I didn't think I would get to, but hey, if the communists get removed, I might get to see Cuba in my lifetime. And hopefully it goes better for them than the fall of the Soviet Union did for the Russians. Oh, nice. We've got plenty of prisoners here. So, fun story about Cuba. So, I have an uncle who speaks Russian fluently. And when he was in college, he got the opportunity to go to the Soviet Union. Actually, not long before it collapsed completely. And my grandfather, always a superstitious man, prayed to Saint Michael that he'd come back safe. He prayed that he would come back safe, and he promised to give up smoking if my uncle came back safe. So my uncle did get back safely, thank God. But my granddad had given up smoking. But while he was in Russia, my uncle had gotten him a box of Cuban cigars that he now could not smoke. And that box of cigars is now faded into dust at this point. They're decades old. Wait, when did I lose this? Yeah, okay. I gotta figure out when I lost this. When did I lose that territory? But yeah, he was a man of his word, and he gave up smoking if my uncle came back safe, so he never touched him. Never touched any tobacco ever again. Well, yeah, but I had those. Let me figure this out. I know I didn't willingly give them up, because I've been investing in those. Good for you. I know that's a hard thing to do. That's what my granddad did. As soon as he made that deal, he quit immediately. Never touched tobacco again for as long as he lived. And he had a pretty good run. He lived to be 86. He also chewed gum and frequently until the day he died. I do know that a lot of ex-smokers substitute it for gum. But every time I saw him throughout my childhood, he'd have some gum in his mouth. There we go. Nice. Yeah, I know kicking an addiction like that is incredibly difficult. Um, I've never had any experience with it, but I've known a few people who have, and yeah, good on you, man. I think my granddad's favorite was Trident. That's what he usually had. So, fun fact about my family and history. My granddad was a postman. Um, and when, in like the 60s and 70s, there was a group of Catonsville students who famously burned their draft cards. He was the mailman that gave them back to him. So that was his brush with history. So yeah, he was. They demanded their draft cards back, and he was like, "Sure." And they then burned them, but he had a brief brush with history. He passed on a few years back, and I mean, I miss him every day, but hell of a guy. He actually almost went to Korea himself. He was drafted. He would have become a cook in the Korean War, but he got a hardship discharge because his father passed away of a heart attack. I mean, that's a pretty damn good run. The same age my grandfather died. Hell of a run. I hope I got his longevity genes. Yeah, that'll only get fixed once I form more duchies, basically. Yeah, I've got a bunch of duchies I need to seize from the remaining Muslim resistance in Anatolia. And he was born during the Great Depression, and I mean he's a big part of why. I remember one time when I was a real little kid, I was just curious about what life was like when he was born. I was born 1933, so he was a kid during the Great Depression and then reached adulthood shortly after World War II. But I just remember he talked to me for hours about it. When I was young, my parents would drop me off at my grandparents' to take care of me while they were at work. And he would go on about his life growing up in the 30s and 40s, and I was fascinated by it. And he'd had an uncle who had served in the Pacific Theater of World War II. Big guy, but he fought throughout the campaign as he was in the Navy. And when that great uncle of mine died, he when my grandfather and his kids were going through his house, they found a Japanese heavy machine gun that the guy had brought home as a trophy. It was wild. But yeah, and my grandmother, she's still around, thank God. She's got this ridiculous longevity genes where pretty much every member of her family has lived into their 90s, and I hope those are the genes I got. But she was born in 35. It's actually if there's one piece of advice I have to anybody listening, talk to your grandparents. Learn about what their lives were like. Because you can learn a lot from that, even if you have no frame of reference for what they're talking about. Because my granddad grew up as a poor kid in Baltimore City in the 30s and 40s. Well, that's fascinating. So he must have... Did he come over after the war, or did his kids come over? He must have seen some incredible things. And my great-grandfather, the father of the grandfather I've been talking about, he rode the orphan trains out to Missouri when he was a kid. But I can imagine how you'd want to get out of Europe after, well, your whole country ceased to exist. That must have been an incredible time to be alive. I mean, like, I have a fairly intimate understanding of that time period when I. So, my company. Oh, that's. That sounds like it was a hell of an experience. Did he have an accent? That would be fantastic. Oh, nice. So was he Austrian or Hungarian or Slovak or nice? See, I'm pretty far removed from a lot of the individual ethnicities from my family's history. Closest I've got is my grandmother, who is French Canadian, and she's still got a bit of an accent. And when she doesn't pronounce H's, for example, so yeah, she still speaks a little bit of French, but that's just a cool connection to the past. And yeah, it's your grandparents have a connection to the past. Anybody who's listening to this, yeah, she was she's from descended from some of the first French settlers in North America. From a small town, Saint Jean de Christophe, in um, near modern day Montreal. It's through her that I learned I am a very distant relation to Justin Trudeau, which I'm not proud of, but it is an interesting thing to know. You figure you get the same group of French farmers living in the same geographical area for several centuries. They're probably all related to one another. It's also through her that I learned I have trace Native American ancestry. That's really cool. I have a cousin who, through his grandmother, is related to William Wadsworth Longfellow. But so the job I'm working at now, the company I work for, they own a whole bunch of historical buildings in Baltimore City. Interesting. But so yeah, my company I work for owns a bunch of buildings in Baltimore City, and they restore them back to their original state and then use them as offices to preserve them, which is a big part of why I really like the company that I work for, because they do this historical preservation work. But when I first started working for them, I got a job as a historical researcher because they wanted to know the history of these buildings and they wanted people to dig into them. So I learned about the history of one address in particular in Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon's a neighborhood in Baltimore that used to be home to a lot of the rich and powerful people who were connected to like major DC families. Well, the guy who owned this particular building, he was a personal friend of Teddy Roosevelt, of Taft, and FDR. And he had both Roosevelt and Taft over to the house for dinner. So I worked in the same building that was visited by both Teddy Roosevelt and Taft, which was fucking cool. And then I learned that FDR sent speeches to this guy. His name was Theodore Marburg. FDR sent him like speeches and press releases for editing because Theodore Marburg was regarded as one of the best like geopolitical advisors in the world at the time. And throughout his lifetime, he was a personal friend of the deposed the deposed heir of the Ottoman Empire and the deposed heir of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. What is it? I'm blanking on his name, but he was the last Habsburg to be heir to the throne, basically. And yeah, the last Osmanoglu, who was heir to the empire, was a friend of his. I don't have any evidence that he ever visited him at that Mount Vernon address. I do know that he visited him at his vacation home in Bar Harbor, Maine. But Marburg is one of those fascinating figures that just gets glossed over because a lot of his biographical information is honestly lost. I found a document written about him, but it didn't have a whole lot of value in it. Um, but at least his house is preserved, and the history of him is out there. So, like, I went to the Library of Congress for this job to research him, and I found that he had personal letters to him from Eleanor Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, um, William Howard Taft, and the ambassadors of Austria, Germany, France, Japan, England, and a bunch of other countries from the mid-century. And it's just, I think of the number of things that he witnessed in his lifetime. He was born 1863, so he was alive for the tail end of the Civil War. He saw the entirety of the Gilded Age. He saw both world wars. And then his daughter actually married the Dutch Governor General of the East Indies. And actually spent most of World War II in a Japanese internment camp. And it's all that history in one single street address in Baltimore City. Because there were other addresses that I studied for them that were just as fascinating. So I studied the address of a renowned neurologist back when the science was very young at the turn of the century. And his mother was known as the poetess of the South during the Civil War, and his father was a colonel under Stonewall Jackson. And I actually went to North Carolina to read the personal correspondences of his mother, and she personally knew both Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee. So I touched letters that were personally signed by both of those guys. I touched letters that were personally signed by the Roosevelts, both Teddy and FDR. These things still exist, and if you're in range, go to the Library of Congress. I did see that. Oh, and I just died again. Someone must be murdering me. That's got to be what this is. Someone is killing me. It's remarkable how identical I look to Alexios. But, oh, and we just lost it again. Gotta be, because I was... Let me look. I keep losing these territories, and I don't want to lose them. I mean, that was the Byzantine Empire in a nutshell. A lot of people died due to palace intrigue. Yeah, that's gotta be it, because I think it passes to my main heir, who would have been my son, which at that point was my nephew. Yeah, that's gotta be it. So, let's see here. Yeah, let me... Yeah, we'll spend lavishly, because we're already in debt. What does it matter? We can ransom some people. Yeah, it looks like it passes to my brother. Well, I want my brother to be my heir, because he's the only one who can inherit at the moment. So I'll keep him as heir, and hopefully I can last long enough that I can name my son Symbasilios, and it'll pass more smoothly to him. I believe he does. Let me see. Yeah, he likes me. He's one of my few advisors that actually likes me. But going back to Marburg for a moment, it's just crazy to me that one man in his life met the King of England, he met the Emperor of Germany, the Emperor of the Austria-Hungary, he met the president of France. He met the deposed heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, the deposed heir to the Ottoman Empire, and 3 presidents. I also had the pleasure of doing research on a building that actually sheltered Abraham Lincoln when there was an attempt made on his life during his trip to Baltimore in 1861, thereabouts. And that same building hosted General Grant after the Civil War when he was president. It's a point of pride for Baltimoreans, is our city has had an influence in American history, but nobody really is aware of it because we're so close to D.C. A lot of people don't really think of us. But Baltimore has been there since the nation was founded. I mean, there was a time when we were America's second largest city, behind only New York. And before COVID, I would commute into Baltimore and I'd walk past buildings that were fascinating. Yeah, I wish it wasn't. I will tell you, it is extremely frustrating to live as close to Baltimore as I do. And I mean, I technically live outside of Baltimore, but it's one of those cities where most of the small towns around it they basically consider themselves Baltimoreans. So it's painful to know Baltimore's past and to see what it's become. And to see that it still has potential. It has incredible potential that it refuses to capitalize on. It is infinitely frustrating. Where are you from? Similar boat to Baltimore. I totally understand. Another town who was an incredible place during America's industrial golden age, yeah. I mean, it's called the Rust Belt for a reason. Yeah, I keep dying. I'm determined to last. I once had a professor who was from Detroit. And see, the university I went to, we had a bunch of people from, like, New York and New Jersey, and they would, like, talk to him, but he was, like, the only people he'd ever met that could understand what it was like growing up near Detroit were born in Baltimore. And then Miss Renegade is from Florida originally, but she's been here most of her life. I am about as East Coast as it gets, I will say, though. Family's from the East Coast, always has been. I bet. I mean, she's got family in New York as well, but I do know a lot of people are leaving that particular state. Me, though, I'm from Maryland. Have been my whole life. Oh, I gotcha. I hear Texas is very nice, and I actually have a few subscriber or followers from there. I'd very much like to visit it. It's on my list. I gotcha. So, stuck in New York until it closes then? Yeah, I bet. I do know that. I mean, given who that state has in charge of it, I can imagine it's a real pain in the ass to try to get out. I got you. I wish you the best of luck in the move and setting up in Florida. Or, sorry, Texas. Ooh, that's rough. See, I think I'll wind up staying in Maryland. One thing I find about this state is the people who are born here tend to stay. Um, I got you. It's crazy what they'll do now with technology. And I will say, I mean, that makes sense. No, not really. They should have advanced the tech by now, but it's weird in America where we've got like some states using state of the art stuff and some states still using 18th century technology to survey things. Me though, I'm pretty committed to Maryland. I like this place. It's got a bit of everything. I mean, there's a reason it's known as the it's basically the East Coast in miniature. We've got mountains, we've got farmland, we've got big cities, we've got beaches. If you want it, Maryland's got it. And I do find that the people who are born in this state do. Oh yeah, so you know what it's about. God, nice, freshly made crab cake with an ice cold can of Natty Boh on a summer day. That's heaven right there. Yeah, I know Natty Boh is shitty beer, but it's our shitty beer, damn it. Everybody in Baltimore has this weird affection for Natty Boh, despite the fact that it's kind of shitty. It's worth a try just to say you've had it. It's like Natty Boh is like just slightly better than Budweiser. It is marginally better than Budweiser, but it's like the beer of Maryland and Baltimore in particular because it's brewed here. Granted, it's owned by a Russian company, but whatever. It's still Natty Boh. I do like some Yingling. That's also fairly close to me. That's Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, no. Everybody I know in Maryland has this weird affection for Natty Boh. Myself included, has this affection for Natty Boh, even though it's objectively not great beer. Yingling is way better than Natty Boh by a long shot, but you can't help but love it if you're from Baltimore. Nice. That sounds like a good trip. Um, oh yeah, I have heard very good things about that. Um, there's a fair number of decent vineyards in America, in Maryland, that are very much worth visiting. Um, we've also got a pretty large selection of nice breweries. Like we've got Dogfish Head and Manor Hill. Actually, is the pilsner I've been drinking. I highly recommend this if you can get your hands on it. Manor Hill Brewery. It's Ellicott City based. Highly recommend it. Their pilsner is delicious. I would love to I mean, speaking of alcohol, New Orleans is very high on my list of places I would love to visit. Yeah, I tend to be much more a fan of like the continental beers, like the German and Czech stuff, as opposed to like the darker beers you find in Ireland and England. But I have a cousin who has the complete opposite taste. He much prefers like a good stout or a like a British ale. Now I can appreciate that, but nothing beats a nice crisp Czech Pilsner or like a nice Belgian or Dutch ale. Oh yeah, no, I wanna try those beignets in person. And as somebody of French Canadian descent, it'll be a cool cultural trip because a lot of French Canadians went down to New Orleans when the British got control of Canada because they refused to live under the English king. So a lot of them fled to Louisiana and settled in New Orleans and the surrounding swampland. Hence Cajuns, that's where they came from. Now, Creoles are different. Creoles are typically the descendants of French citizens and black citizens together. Cajuns are Canadian migrants who came to Louisiana after the British got control of French Canada. Nice. Yeah, my grandmother's family are the ones who stayed in French Canada after the British got control of it, and then they migrated south to Vermont a while later. And we're dead. Again. I'm gonna reload this one more time and see if I can't make this guy last just a little bit longer, because I don't want to give up that land. I think it's just the stress that keeps killing me. Actually, you said your grandfather was a Slovak, correct? That was a little while ago, but we actually have in Baltimore a bunch of Western Slavs who came here. So if you go to Baltimore today, you can find a bunch of Western Slavic names that don't really seem to fit. So it's like we have a Saint Wenceslaus church. We didn't get many Slovaks in Baltimore. We did get a bunch of Czechs and Polish who came to the city during the early 20th century and settled here. Paradoxically, Baltimore was also the main port of arrival for Germans throughout the 19th century. So it's Baltimore's got a weird history, but there is actually a like Western Slavic American cultural museum somewhere in Baltimore. I'm forgetting exactly where. Baltimore's got just a weird history, but I love it. So yeah, a lot of there's a handful of them. The only group that really stayed in Baltimore were the Polish. So you can find some good like pierogi and other like Polish food in Dundalk, Western Baltimore. The Italians also stuck around. Most of the Germans kept going westward, although my German ancestors came here far earlier than that. I've never been to Syracuse, but I do love me some good Eastern European food. Um, yeah, Baltimore's German history, most of the Germans left. I've never had it, but it sounds tasty. Every Slavic recipe I've tried has been delicious. Like I once tried my hand at making chicken Kiev. Oh my god, it's wonderful. There's no restaurants around me that serve it, but I learned the recipe myself. Delicious. Eat chicken Kiev if you get the chance. It's basically just fried butter. Fried butter with chicken wrapped around it, but it's delicious. Um, I have had goulash. It's delicious. I mean, Hungarians aren't Slavs, but I do know a few good Hungarian recipes. I make a mean chicken paprikash. I keep dying. It's got to be the stress that keeps doing me in. I hope this run isn't dead. I'll give it one more go, and then I'll call it a night, I think. This is great, though. I keep just dying from the stress. I hate that mechanic. I really hate that mechanic. Weirdly enough, my college actually had a fantastic beef goulash recipe. I don't know how they made it so good, because I don't think there was a single, like, Eastern European who worked in the kitchens. Man, was that good. That was my favorite thing when they had it at the dining hall when I was there. It's just delightful. I bet, yeah, I mean, when it's, yeah, I think that's me dead again. So I think I'm gonna call it a night. But you are 100% right there with Eastern European cooking and the paprika. It's like how with French cooking, when in doubt, add more butter. With Hungarian cooking, when in doubt, add more paprika. Oh, it's fine. I wasn't too attached to this run. I was mostly doing it to review the mod, so I think I might be back to normal CK3 next time. Um, I do like the mod. It's pretty good. It could use some polishing, though, I will say. This mod, and it is still a work in progress, but if you're looking for a mod that is more historically accurate, pick up the Ave Maria mod. Also true. I love me some French wine. And Sarmagnac cognac is also tasty if you're into some hard liquor. Because it's cognac that won't break the bank, which is pretty rare, all things considered. Because cognac is... Oh, you can waste a lot of money on cognac, but Sarmagnac is pretty affordable. It's like a $25 bottle of cognac. It's way cheaper than like Hennessy or any of those the big name ones. So yeah, if you like it, pick yourself up a bottle of Sarmagnac. It's delicious. But on that note, I think I'm going to end it for the night. Have a great night and a great week, everybody. This is Renegade Historian signing off. There will be no streams next weekend because that is the official move-in day for Miss Renegade and I. So I will see you all probably the weekend after, which would be well, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but thank you. So yeah, I will see you all when I see you, but it won't be next weekend, probably the weekend after. So good night, everybody. Have a great week. Renegade Historian signing off.